Alaikum everyone. Hope you all are doing fine. We Team PFS decided to start a video series where we'll discuss some common problems of CFA Level 1 candidates. I'm Galib. I'm going to be the moderator for today's sessions. I really believe this will be really helpful for the CFA Level 1 candidates and also will be interesting for those who has interest in economics or in finance. So we'll start our video series with economics, and today we will discuss on chapter 1, which is the topics in demand and supply. So we have with us our own Nafiz Al Tariq. He's a CFA charter holder and FRM holder. So welcome, Nafiz bhai.
Welcome and thank you, Gali, for your time. So I think this video will be helpful for candidates who have different problems on CFA curriculum. So we would like to start with the economics. So I think you carry on your questions.
So my first question is actually related to the demand equation and demand curve. Let's assume a simple demand functions. Quantity demanded is equal to say 100 minus twice P. To find out the equation, our curriculum suggests us to convert it into a inverse demand function. So there's a common question from most of the students that why we need to inverse demand function.
Okay, this is one of the most commonly asked questions by many students. So if you look at demand equation, for example, quantity equals to 100 minus twice P. So this means for every taka increase in price, the demand falls by taka 2. So the demand equation is shows that the price and quantity is negatively related. But the problem is if we look demand curve, so you'll be able to see that the price is on the vertical axis and quantity is on the horizontal axis. So let me show you a graph. So the quantity equals to 100 minus twice P. So if we draw a graph like this, the Q must be here and P must be here. But you will not find any demand curve where P is in the horizontal axis and Q is on the vertical axis. So in a typical demand curve, Q is always in the horizontal axis and P is on the vertical axis. So in order to do that, we need to inverse this demand function. We need to make a function where price should be equals to as a function of quantity. So if we do that, price will be equals to 50 minus 0.5 into Q. So where Q is on the horizontal axis and P is on the vertical axis, and we'll draw a demand curve like this. And this demand curve has a slope of 0.5. So in order to convert the demand curve where quantity is on the horizontal axis and price is on the vertical axis, we need to inverse this demand function like this one, so that we get the equation as an inverse demand equation, and where quantity is on the horizontal axis and price is on the vertical axis.
That's really helpful. On the follow-up of that, there is a common confusion among the students that what's the difference between relationship between the slope and the demand curve and the elasticity. So it would be really helpful if you just explain elasticity and slope of the demand curve.
Okay. The demand curve slope and the elasticity are not the same. So first we need to look at the definition of the elasticity. So elasticity shows the changes in quantity divided by quantity. So we can say that percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. So percentage change in quantity should be equals to changes in quantity divided by quantity divided by changes in price divided by price. So elasticity shows the percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price, whereas the demand equation shows the percentage, the absolute change in quantity due to changes in price. For example, if we take this definition, changes in quantity divided by changes in P multiplied by P divided by Q. So we can say that elasticity is changes in quantity divided by changes in price multiplied by price to quantity ratio, whereas the demand curve slope is changes in P divided by changes in quantity, which is the inverse function of this one. So we can say the slope of the demand curve shows absolute changes in price divided by absolute changes in quantity, whereas the elasticity shows the reciprocal of the slope of the demand curve multiplied by price to quantity ratio. And if we look at this equation, so this 2 is the coefficient of price, whereas in case of slope of the demand curve, we can take the reciprocal of these 2, which is equals to 0.5, which is the slope of the demand curve. So bottom line is the demand curve slope and the elasticity are not same.
Great. I hope it will clear confusion of many students. Another common questions is regarding the marginal revenue. Why marginal revenue is equal to price in case of perfect competition, but why it's lower than price in case of imperfect markets, such as monopolistic market?
Okay, so there are three parts of it. The first part is the marginal revenue, how it can be calculated. The second part is the slope of the demand curve of perfectly competitive market. And the third part is slope of the demand curve of monopolistic market or imperfectly competitive market. So let me show you the definition of marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is equals to changes in total revenue divided by changes in quantity. So changes in total revenue can be decomposed into changes in P multiplied by Q plus changes in Q multiplied by P. So the new quantity has to be sold at the new price and the old quantity has to be sold at the lower price. So if we take this equation and divide it by changes in quantity, then we get marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is equals to changes in Q divided by changes in Q into price plus changes in P divided by changes in Q into Q. So this is one. So we can say price plus changes in P divided by changes in Q into Q. So we can say that marginal revenue is equal to price plus this one is the slope of the demand curve. So we can say marginal revenue is equals to price plus slope of the demand curve multiplied by quantity. So this is the first part. So the second part is the demand function or demand curve. So the demand curve of perfectly competitive market is horizontal. So this is horizontal, which means the slope of the demand curve is 0. So if the slope of the demand curve is 0, and if in this equation 0 multiplied by quantity is 0, so marginal revenue must be equal to price. So since the slope of the demand curve for perfectly competitive market is 0, marginal revenue is equal to price. We can say MR equals to price in case of perfectly competitive market. But in case of imperfectly competitive market, for example, monopolistic competitive market, the demand curve is downward sloping. So since the demand curve is downward sloping and MR equals to price plus slope multiplied by quantity, so downward sloping demand curve, which means slope is negative. So negative slope multiplied by quantity, so this part must be negative. So this negative is added with P, so MR must be less than price. So if this is the demand curve, MR curve will be like this. So always in a monopolistic market, monopolistically competitive market, or we can say imperfectly competitive market, marginal revenue is lower than price. But in case of horizontal demand curve, for example, in case of perfectly competitive market, marginal revenue is equal to price.
Cool. Even I sometimes get confused with all this demand and everything. We all know that demand law, that if price increases, demand falls. If price decreases, demand increases. But sometimes it doesn't hold, especially with Giffen, inferior, and Veblen goods. So would you please explain all this and tell us the difference between these three?
Okay, so the law of demand says that when there's a increase in price, the demand falls, and when there's a decrease in price, the demand increases. So if there's a decrease in price, the demand for good increases. Why this happens? This happens for two reasons. The first reason is the goods become cheaper. The goods become cheaper compared to its substitute. So some of the consumption from that substitute goods come to this good, and the demand is increases. So we call this as substitution effect. So because of the substitution effect, the demand increases. And also when there is a fall in price, your purchasing power increases. So in terms of economics, we say that your real income increases, even though your nominal income did not change. So when there's a real income increases, if income increases, the demand for most goods, which are normal, which increases. So we can say that if your income increases and the demand for good increases, we can say that that's a normal good. But sometimes what happened when there's a change in price, there's a fall in price and your real income increases, the demand for good falls. Maybe that good become inferior to you. For example, many staple goods, the demand falls when there's an increase in income. So for goods where the demand falls because there's a change in income, there's an increase in income, but demand falls, we can say that the good is an inferior good. So let's come to Giffen goods. So Giffen good is also fundamentally an inferior good, but in case of Giffen good, the negative income effect is so large that it dominates the positive substitution effect. So since the negative income effect dominates the positive substitution effect, so when there's a fall in price, the demand falls. And when there's an increase in price, the demand increases. This means demand curve is positively sloped. And this is a violation of the law of demand. So, and again, this happens for many consumer staple goods, like for example, rice. So if there is an increase in price, the demand increases, and there's a decrease in price, the demand decreases. But this happens because of the negative income effect, and the negative income effect is larger than the positive substitution effect. And that is where the demand curve is positively sloped. In case of Veblen goods, the demand curve is also positively sloped, but for a complete different reason. What are the goods? For example, luxury goods like expensive jewelry or expensive cars, golds, and all these things. So the price tag itself actually motivates you to buy the goods. So when there's an increase in price, the demand increases, and when there's a decrease in price, the demand decreases. Why? Because you consider it as a high status goods. So whenever there's an increase in price, it shows that you are having high status, so you tend to buy more. And when there is a fall in price, you tend to buy less. And this happens for most high status goods, and that is an example of Veblen goods, which is a positively sloped demand curve. We often call this consumption like conspicuous consumption, because you are buying that good because of showing your high status rather than looking at the value of the product.
Wonderful. That's extremely helpful. It has been a wonderful session so far. So I have one last question for today. Sometimes students ask and they get confused with the normal profit and economic profit. So would you please explain the difference between the normal profit and economic profit?
Okay. So I think whenever we see any company's income statement, we normally see a profit, and that profit we call an accounting profit. So in order to get an accounting profit, we need to get the total revenue first, and then we deduct all the accounting costs. And all the accounting costs are normally the implicit accounting costs, and sometimes there are some accounting depreciation as well. In case of economic profit, and in economics, when we say profit, we say it's an economic profit. So total revenue minus total cost is the economic profit. So when you say total cost, we include both the explicit cost and also the implicit cost. So explicit costs like wages for labor, salaries for employees, rent for capital, rent for buildings, and all these things. There are some implicit costs as well. For example, if you wouldn't do the business, probably you could do a job where you get salaries. And you also invested your own capital in the company. So if you invest that money in a bank or like any market, then you will get some rent or profit or interest from that. So if we take an example, for example, your salary for a whole year is 10 lakh and your profit from your capital is another 10 lakh. So there's a 20 lakh taka opportunity cost. And if you get 25 lakh taka profit from your business, we can say that your economic profit is 5 lakh. But the total profit, actually, the total accounting profit is 25 lakh. So in case of economic profit, we deduct the economic cost, which is the implicit cost and also the explicit cost. But in case of normal profit, if you see that economic profit is zero, then you are earning zero economic profit, but you are still earning normal profit, which is just covering your opportunity cost. So normal profit is the profit when economic profit is zero, or we can say the opportunity cost of your investment and your time and your labor. And the economic profit is deducting all the costs, including implicit and explicit costs.
Great. That's all for today. Thank you, Nafiz bhai, for your time and explanation. I must say it's a refresher for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you.